For over 16 years, Whitey Bulger was the FBI's most wanted fugitive, eluding capture while leaving behind a trail of destruction. As one of America's most infamous crime bosses, he ruled Boston's underworld with an iron fist, orchestrating crimes so disturbing they remain imprinted in history.
He ruled by fear, he ruled by charm, he was always one step ahead of everybody else.
But his reign of terror ended in the most brutal and mysterious way imaginable, his final 24 hours becoming a story as shocking as the life he led, the early years. Born on September 3, 1929, James Joseph Whitey Bulger grew up in the impoverished streets of South Boston. His parents, James Sr. and Jane, were Irish-American, but life in the Bulger household wasn't easy. James Sr., a laborer on the docks, suffered a disabling workplace injury, leaving the family in financial distress, forcing the Bulgers to move into public housing at the Mary Ellen McCormick Project. In a household of 6 siblings, Whitey stood apart for his rebellious streak. His brother Billy, the youngest of the family, would eventually take a very different path, rising to become one of the most powerful politicians in Massachusetts. Southie, South Boston itself, was a world of poverty and crime. The area was dominated by Irish mobsters who controlled the streets with an iron fist, becoming both a warning and an inspiration to young men like Whitey. This environment not only normalized crime, but also offered a blueprint for survival and power. For boys like Whitey, toughness was not just admired, it was essential for survival. Neighborhood loyalty ran deep, and disputes were often settled with fists rather than words. Even as a child, Whitey had a reputation that set him apart. He was daring, fiercely independent, and unafraid of confrontation. By his early teens, he was involved in theft, street fights, and gang-related activities. He didn't just follow the rules of the streets, he rewrote them, setting himself apart as someone who could navigate the dangerous currents of Southie with ease.
By the time he was in his early teens, it was pretty clear that Whitey had decided he was going to be a criminal.
While his peers were content with small-time hustles, Whitey had bigger aspirations. He wasn't interested in being just another face in the crowd. He wanted control, and that allowed him to climb the ranks of Southie's criminal underworld. His first encounters with the law came early. As a teenager, he was arrested multiple times for minor offenses, like theft and disorderly conduct. Each arrest added to his notoriety in the neighborhood. Juvenile detention became a familiar place for him, but instead of deterring him, it only fueled his defiance. He emerged tougher, angrier, and more determined to forge his path outside the boundaries of the law. As he moved into adulthood, Bulger's ambitions grew bolder. He graduated from petty theft to armed robbery, targeting banks in daring heists that showcased his audacity. It wasn't long before federal authorities caught up with him, leading to his first significant prison sentence. During his time behind bars, he was transferred to several facilities, including the infamous Alcatraz. In the 1950s, Alcatraz was a place for America's most hardened criminals, and Bulger fit right in. While there, he participated in controversial CIA-backed experiments, reportedly involving LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as acid or Lucy, a powerful psychedelic drug that can intensify thoughts, emotions, and sensory perception in exchange for reduced sentences. These experiments highlighted his willingness to take risks, even with his own mind, if it meant gaining an advantage. His time in Alcatraz reinforced his image as someone who couldn't be broken, and that earned him respect among fellow inmates and the criminal underworld. Even as a prisoner, Bulger's persona loomed large. He was known as Whitey due to his light blonde hair, a nickname he despised but couldn't shake. Despite his disdain for the nickname, it stuck, becoming synonymous with the fear and control he would later wield over Boston's crime scene. By the time he left prison, Whitey Bulger wasn't just another small-time crook. He had emerged with the skills, connections, and hardened mindset that would soon propel him to the top of Boston's criminal hierarchy. Crime boss and the FBI connection. Whitey Bulger's criminal empire began to gain notoriety in the 1970s as he solidified his position within Boston's infamous Winter Hill Gang. Initially a trusted member, Bulger's ambition and ruthless tactics helped him rise to the top, eventually taking over leadership of the gang. Under his command, the Winter Hill Gang became a powerhouse in Boston's crime scene. Through extortion, drug trafficking, loan sharking, and money laundering, he built an empire that thrived on fear and control. Bulger's reputation for violence was central to his rule. Known for his brutal tactics, He eliminated threats with a terrifying efficiency, often orchestrating or personally carrying out the murders of his rivals, informants, or anyone who crossed him. Each act of violence sent a clear message. Snitching, disloyalty, or defiance would not be tolerated. But while his ruthlessness cemented his grip on power, his charisma allowed him to maintain a different image in South Boston. To many in the community, he was a protector, a man who kept the streets safe from outside threats and occasionally offered financial help to struggling locals. This duality of protector and predator made him a uniquely dangerous figure. People either admired him or feared him, but no one ignored him. One of the most controversial aspects of Bulger's reign was his relationship with the FBI. In the late 1970s, he developed a partnership with FBI agent John Connolly. Officially, Bulger became an informant, feeding the FBI information about the Italian Mafia, his primary rivals in Boston. This arrangement helped the FBI dismantle the Patriarca crime family, but it also granted Bulger near-total immunity. With law enforcement focused on his enemies, Bulger operated with impunity, eliminating competition while expanding his influence. However, this alliance wasn't purely transactional. Bulger skillfully manipulated Connolly and others within the FBI, ensuring they turned a blind eye to his activities. He used the Bureau as a shield, staying steps ahead of investigations and consolidating power while the FBI provided cover. For over a decade, this relationship allowed Bulger to thrive, making him virtually untouchable. The alliance began to unravel in the 1990s as internal investigations exposed corruption within the FBI. The revelation that Bulger had been protected by law enforcement sparked outrage. Public trust in the FBI was shaken, and the agency faced intense scrutiny for its role in enabling Bulger's reign of terror. As the walls closed in, Bulger's immunity vanished, and federal authorities turned their attention to dismantling his empire. In 1994, an indictment on multiple charges, including racketeering and murder, forced Bulger into hiding. The indictment named him as the mastermind behind numerous violent crimes, cementing his reputation as one of America's most dangerous criminals. Bulger, however, had an advantage. FBI agent John Connolly, the same man who had protected him for years, tipped him off about the impending arrest. He had no choice but to go on a run and leave behind Boston, marking the beginning of one of the most infamous manhunts in American history for the next 16 years, during which Bulger became one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. Bulger remained a ghost, evading capture while his former associates faced justice. His downfall, however, began with the very system he had once exploited. The exposure of the FBI's corrupt relationship with Bulger brought his criminal empire crashing down, leaving only questions of how he had managed to operate so freely for so long. Bulger fled with his longtime girlfriend, Catherine Gray. Together, they meticulously planned their life on the run, adopting false identities to stay off the radar and moving from one location to another to avoid detection. For much of their time in hiding, they lived in plain sight. In Santa Monica, California, the couple lived frugally, relying on cash stashes. They rented a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, blending in as an unassuming older couple. Bulger, using the name Charlie Gasco, lived a low-profile life, frequently walking his neighborhood and befriending locals who never suspected the truth. Catherine Gray's devotion to Bulger played a critical role in maintaining their cover, though it also attracted attention from authorities. The breakthrough came in June 2011 when the FBI received a tip from a woman in Iceland who had seen a news report about Gray. She recognized the woman as her former neighbor in Santa Monica. Acting quickly, agents staked out the apartment complex and confirmed the tip. Bulger's arrest on June 22, 2011 marked the end of one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in FBI history. The raid on his apartment revealed a shocking arsenal. More than 30 firearms, $822,000 in cash hidden in the walls, and multiple fake IDs. For a man who had lived under the radar for so long, the discovery of such preparation was a testament to his paranoia and readiness for a violent confrontation. However, the arrest itself was quiet. Bulger surrendered without a fight. The news of his capture came as a surprise to everyone. For years, Whitey Bulger had been a symbol of lawlessness, corruption, and impunity. His arrest brought a sense of closure to the victims of his crimes and their families, though it also reignited questions about the FBI's role in enabling his decades-long reign of terror, conviction, and sentencing. In 2013, after years of evading justice, Whitey Bulger finally faced the courtroom. His trial in Boston was a spectacle, drawing widespread media attention and reopening old wounds for the families of his victims. The charges against him were staggering: 19 murders, racketeering, extortion, money laundering, and drug trafficking. The government presented a mountain of evidence, including testimony from former associates who had turned against him. These witnesses, some of whom were murderers themselves, described in disturbing detail how Bulger orchestrated and committed acts of violence to maintain his iron grip on Boston's crime scene. People already knew about his crime, but this trial revealed the depth of his crimes, including the brutal murders of rivals, informants, and even innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. One of the most shocking revelations was the cold, calculated manner in which Bulger operated. He was described as a man who ruled through fear, using violence not just as a tool, but as a message to anyone who dared oppose him. His victims' families gave emotional testimonies, recounting years of pain and loss caused by Bulger's actions. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Bulger maintained his innocence on certain charges, claiming he was never an informant for the FBI, a claim that had long been a source of controversy. However, the jury ultimately convicted him on 31 counts, including 11 murders. The verdict was a resounding condemnation of Bulger's decades-long reign of terror. On November 14, 2013, Bulger was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms plus 5 years, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in prison. The judge labeled his crimes heinous and described him as a man who had left a trail of destruction and suffering in his wake. For the families of his victims, his sentencing to life in prison was supposed to be the final chapter, a man stripped of his power, living out his days behind bars. But for Bulger, the story wasn't over. The final 24 hours. Fast forward to October 29, 2018. By this point, Whitey Bulger had spent just over 7 years in federal custody following his 2011 capture after 16 years on the run. The 89-year-old, once a feared crime boss, was now frail, confined to a wheelchair, and reportedly in declining health. That morning, he was quietly transferred from USP Coleman in Florida to USP Hazleton in West Virginia, a prison infamous for its violence and known by the sinister nickname Misery Mountain. The timing and decision to move Bulger came under immediate scrutiny. Hazleton was a high-security facility notorious for housing some of the country's most dangerous inmates, including violent gang members and mafia figures. It had already seen multiple inmate murders earlier that year, a grim indicator of the risks that awaited new arrivals. The timing of Bulger's transfer was puzzling, and critics questioned why such a high-profile, high-risk inmate was placed in a general population unit in one of the most volatile prisons in the federal system. For many, it was a decision that defied logic and raised suspicions about whether it was truly a matter of routine or something more deliberate by the higher-ups. But nonetheless, this decision would set the stage for the final 24 hours of one of America's most notorious crime bosses. Due to the unusual circumstances surrounding his transfer, rumors quickly spread that the transfer was designed to put Bulger in harm's way. As a former FBI informant who had betrayed members of organized crime, Bulger was despised by countless inmates who considered him a traitor. Allegations arose that someone within the Bureau of Prisons might have orchestrated the move to expose Bulger to danger, potentially to ensure the damaging secrets from his criminal past, and his controversial relationship with the FBI remained buried. The lack of added protections only fueled speculation that this was no ordinary transfer. This wasn't the first time Bulger's safety had come into question during his time in custody. After his sentencing in 2013, he had faced numerous threats from fellow inmates, even when he served his time at the USP Coleman in Florida, many of whom viewed him as the ultimate symbol of betrayal. Incidents of harassment and intimidation followed him at nearly every facility he was housed in. Despite this, the Bureau of Prisons placed him in general population at Hazleton, a move that left even some staff baffled. How could one of America's most infamous informants be sent to a prison filled with inmates who had every reason to seek revenge for being a snitch? When Bulger arrived at Hazleton that afternoon, alarms were raised among those familiar with the prison's volatile dynamics. Hazleton was home to violent criminals, including mafia members with long-standing grudges against snitches and informants. Among Among its inmates was Faudios Freddy Gies, a former mafia hitman serving a life sentence for his involvement in organized crime. Gies, who had a deep disdain for rats, would later be named as one of the key suspects in Bulger's murder. To many observers, Hazleton seemed like the worst possible destination for someone like Bulger. His placement in general population defied standard protocol for inmates of his notoriety and vulnerability. Prison staff, who were aware of the volatile mix of inmates, reportedly questioned the decision, but were unable to intervene. The Bureau of Prisons came under fire almost immediately after his transfer. Critics accused the agency of negligence, pointing to the lack of extra security measures for such a high-risk prisoner. Some even suggested deliberate oversight, questioning whether Bulger's transfer and vulnerability were accidents at all. Bulger's reputation only heightened the tension. To the prison's population, he was not just another inmate, he was a symbol of betrayal, a dishonest and greedy man who had evaded justice for decades while working with the FBI to protect himself. This made him an ideal target for those seeking vengeance or notoriety. The stage was set for what would be Bulger's final day. On October 30th, 2018, Whitey Bulger's first full day at USP Hazleton began like any other for the prison's general population. He was confined to a wheelchair, an aging figure among a dangerous mix of violent offenders. Bulger, known for being a very cunning man, reportedly kept to himself, observing his surroundings. There are no confirmed reports of him expressing concerns about his safety, but the risk was clear to anyone aware of his history. In the early hours of October 30th, 2018, while most inmates at USP Hazleton were still asleep, a group of men entered Whitey Bulger's cell. The assault was swift and brutal. Using a padlock tied inside a sock, the attackers beat Bulger repeatedly, focusing on his face and head. The discovery of Bulger's body by the prison staff added to the sense of outrage and mystery. When prison staff found him, his lifeless body was still in the chair, bloodied and beaten beyond recognition. Witnesses and later reports revealed that Bulger was tied to his chair during the attack, unable to defend himself. The gruesome nature of the scene highlighted the brutality of the attack. The facility was placed on immediate lockdown as authorities scrambled to contain the fallout. The details of the attack fueled immediate speculation. One of the suspected attackers, Faudios Freddy Gies, was a mafia associate with a long-standing hatred for snitches and informants. For men like Gies, Bulger's history as an FBI informant represented the ultimate betrayal, a cardinal sin in the world of organized crime that can never be forgiven. The ferocity of the attack suggested it was personal, possibly driven by a desire to send a message. Bulger's death certificate lists his time of death as 8:21 a.m., officially ruling his death as a homicide due to blunt force injuries of the head. The U.S. Department of Justice later reported that prison officials failed to properly assess whether Bulger faced harm from other inmates at Hazleton, a facility notorious for being understaffed and dangerous. In August 2022, new details revealed that inmates knew of Bulger's impending transfer, leading to a planned attack that lasted just 7 minutes. But the circumstances surrounding the murder raised deeper questions. Some alleged that the attack wasn't just an inmate retaliation, but part of a broader conspiracy. Critics pointed to the suspicious timing of Bulger's transfer to Hazleton, a facility with a reputation for violence, and the decision to place him in general population despite his high-risk status. Theories emerged that individuals within the Bureau of Prisons or other powerful figures wanted Bulger silenced. His decades-long career as a crime boss and informant meant he carried secrets that could implicate others, potentially making his death convenient for some. The FBI quickly launched an investigation, but the implications were troubling. How could one of the country's most infamous inmates with a known history of being a target be left vulnerable in such a dangerous environment? The Bureau of Prisons faced intense criticism, with allegations of negligence or worse. In September 2024, Faudios Freddy Gies, already serving a life sentence, received an additional 25 years for his role in Bulger's murder. The Justice Department's watchdog report highlighted deeply troubling failures that led to Bulger's death less than 12 hours after his arrival at the West Virginia prison. For the victims of Bulger's crimes and their families, his death brought mixed emotions. Some saw it as long overdue justice, a violent end befitting a man who had caused so much pain. Others felt cheated, robbed of the chance to see him live out his life in prison. facing the consequences of his actions. The murder of Whitey Bulger remains one of the most controversial events for men like Guille's history. Whether the result of negligence, revenge, or something more sinister, his violent end marked the final chapter of a life defined by power, betrayal, and brutality. Those who knew Whitey Bulger remember him as a polarizing man. His violent death marked the end of one of America's darkest criminal sagas, but it left behind a trail of unresolved questions. How could a man so feared and so infamous meet such a fate in federal custody? And who, if anyone, should be held accountable? As with much of Whitey Bulger's life, the answers remain shrouded in mystery and speculation.